Business athletes, what is going on? I hope everyone is doing well and welcome back for another action-packed episode of Business Athlete Tactics coming at you. So this one is the 10 health markers in your blood work every entrepreneur should track. Remembering, normal labs do not mean optimal health. So the top 10, if I had to choose 10 biomarkers that you should run consistently and you should pay attention to consistently to get the best ROI with your health, what are they? So the reason I want to do this is because you know that I'm an advocate for getting comprehensive lab panels done, and I would tell you that in the first year or two of your transformation, getting comprehensive panels done 2 times a year is a good idea. After the first year, you could probably do it once. I would still do it twice, but you could probably do it once. But I do think it's still advisable to get these 10 approximately run as a metric of progress. Because some markers in your blood work are not as significant as others. You know, for example, there are different immune system markers that a lot of insurance panels will run, you know, basophils and lymphocytes and stuff like that. And that's not that helpful. I mean, unless someone has cancer or unless someone is sick when they run the blood work, those markers are usually not a huge concern. But there are other markers that I think are quite significant and really will tell you a lot about your body. They'll tell you a lot about your diet and where you need to focus. And I will tie every marker back to some type of biofeedback or physiological thing you're experiencing. Because I do think that when we're talking about numbers and data and all this nerdy biology stuff, I think it's important to tie it back to what does this mean for you as the average professional and business athlete and entrepreneur? What does this mean for you as a parent? Right? How is this relatable? So that's what we are going to do. So in no particular order. So whether I go take this one first or last, this is not any sequence of importance. I would say, and by the way, you can run 200 to 400 different biomarkers. So the top 10 is quite significant. That's really trimming it down and having to choose some things and leave other things out that are still important. So at the right out of the gate, I would say that still go get your complete comprehensive lab panels done. If you need any feedback or suggestions or help on how to do that or where to do that, just reach out to me, let me know, because this is obviously part of what I do. I can contract out and get the right places for you to run these labs. And then part of what I do is I can take those and I review them and I help you get into what's called the Goldilocks zone. So a lot of these places, they might have a portal that you can log into, but they just show you if your blood work is normal or abnormal. So it's just basically in range or not in range, green or red. You got to remember that a lot of biomarkers have very, very wide ranges, very wide ranges. And so if something is normal, but it's in a very suboptimal part of the range, you might still be getting a lot of negative biofeedback effects, but it's quote unquote normal. A classic example is testosterone in men. You know, the range is about 300 through to 1,000, generally speaking. But you might be 320. If you're at 320, you will be getting physiological effects of low testosterone. More than likely, your muscle mass, your body composition won't be ideal. Your energy and your mood will be low, mood swings. You just won't feel very good. And then obviously, how is that affecting your life? How is that affecting how you perform, how you show up? How is that affecting the way you interact with your partner and your children and stuff? So we want to get into the Goldilocks zone. So it's like the top 10%, that area where the magic happens. And that's a huge part of what I focus on. So that's why it's so sought after, because people want to not only get their data, but they actually want to feel really good. It's one thing to get the labs run. It's one thing to have all this data. What do you do with it? That's my thing. What do you do with it? How do you make this useful? And how do you manipulate your diet and your supplementation and your training and your lifestyle once you get this information? That's a whole other thing in and of itself. But it's not complicated once you know what to do. So, the first thing that I think is really worth testing is ApoB, or apolipoprotein B. This is also known as your small particle LDL. Now, the reason why this is important is because ApoB represents the number of atherogenic particles that can cause plaque buildup in your arteries. A lot of people will just focus on HDL and LDL. I would actually tell you that ApoB is a much more accurate predictor of heart disease and stroke and heart attack risk. Much more accurate predictor. So if someone just gets a typical lipid panel, so lipids means cholesterol, and they have HDL and they have LDL and they have maybe the ratio, that's one thing. But what I think is very important is knowing your ApoB numbers. Because if you have, say for instance, the approximate normal would be anything below 100, right? I would say that if you're up around 100, that's suboptimal. Again, we want to be in these Goldilocks zones. So we want to be down around 70, even a little bit less. Now, there are a few different ways to do this. I'm not going to dive into all the mechanics of what to do. I'll share some of it with you. But I want you to recognize that that's why you want to get into my Business Athlete Council or reach out for some PKX one-on-one concierge training, because I can give you all the good stuff that way. Now, what I would say, the first thing with ApoB is think of it a bit like sandpaper on your arteries. Imagine if you had sandpaper and you just took sandpaper to your skin and you just start rubbing it, rub. Eventually, it's going to get really raw, really inflamed, and quite septic. Think of ApoB like that on the inside of your vascular system. So what it does is it causes all this inflammation and this rawness. And then what your body does is it's like, oh man, this is rough. Let's release certain things into the body that causes these buildups, these plaque buildups. It's trying to heal the lining. It's trying to fix things. What happens is as you lay down these plaques, all your arteries and vascular system gets more narrow. Think about it. It's got to go somewhere. So it gets more narrow. And as it gets more narrow, that is when you run into the risk of heart attacks and strokes. And I would say that this is something that starts happening in your 20s and it proliferates into your 30s and it becomes much more detectable in your 40s onward. It's very important. So I would tell you the earlier that you can get onto this and be proactive about it, the better. Because it will be something that happens over the course of years. And it's something that if you can optimize early, it will be such a peace of mind for you. I've literally seen the anxiety that people experience when they feel like they're having heart issues. Their heart may start racing, or they might feel like it sort of skips a beat, or something's going on with their vascular system. And whether it's anxiety or something legitimate in terms of cardiovascular, people get really scared. They get very scared, especially when you're in your 40s and onwards. That's where a lot of men in particular really, really need to pay attention. I would say the people that this pertains to the most is men in their 30s and onward, and women that are going through menopause or who have gone through some type of menopausal change but haven't been doing any hormone replacement therapy protocols. Because what you'll find is that one of the two of the main drivers that help with controlling this number is estrogen and HDL. And those are the two things that start to tank in women when they start to go into menopause. And men just seem to be more susceptible to this. There's probably like a genetic factor in this as well. I mean, there is a genetic factor in this too. So part of it is you have to work with what you've been given, but you really want to make sure that you pull the levers that you have control over. So for example, I have what I would say is a little bit of hypolipidemia, meaning my body's sensitive to increases in LDL and cholesterol, seemingly a lot more than the average person. And so for me, the things that I've focused on over the course of, a number of years is I personally do a whole food plant-based diet. So a whole food plant-based diet has been shown to be very, very effective for managing cardiovascular risk, bringing down any of those issues that can happen with heart attacks and strokes, like very effective. I tried a number of different dietary models early on, and the only thing that really got my number down significantly was plant-based nutrition. Now, I'm not here to tell you have to do all of that. Well, I would always encourage you to do something rather than nothing. So you might say, oh man, look, I love XYZ too much. I get it. It's human nature. What I would also say is, how can you incorporate some of these foods, some of these protocols into your process and find a sweet spot for you? Because part of it's about you finding a sweet spot for you. So it's going to be, first of all, making sure that your HDL cholesterol is more optimal. So HDL, the good cholesterol, that's going to respond to good quality omega-3s, monounsaturated fats, but good quality omega-3s, like a double dose. For me personally, I use a double dose of Clean Machine ahi flour omegas, but there are other good brands out there that have good DHA and EPA products, like Thorne is another good one. So I would be doing a double serving of omega-3s. Typically, one serving is about 3 capsules. I'd be doing a double serving. The good thing about everything that I suggest to you guys is that I'm always focusing on like 10 birds with one stone, like maximal ROI. Because what I've realized is that higher doses of omega-3s are not only good for improving lipid profiles like ApoB, but it's good for joint, ligament, and tendon health. It's also good for mood stabilization and brain function. So I want to do things that yield a high return. That's the key. Anything I suggest to you guys is typically because there is some type of multi-return factor on it. Now, outside of that supplementation, just making sure that you're getting lots of good monounsaturated fats in. So it's going to be things like the Blueprint extra virgin olive oil, whole olives, avocado, hemp seed, chia seed, flaxseed. It's going to be things like good quality salmon or sardines, different types of fatty fish. Those would typically be some of the good bases. Even things like tofu. Tofu is more of a protein source, but it does have monounsaturated fats in it too. So that's the first thing. You want to get that HDL profile up. Some of the other things that I think are useful, and by the way, a lot of what I suggest here, you will find that these suggestions are pretty universal. So I'm not going to go into as much detail with every single marker because some of these suggestions will actually help, it will help everything, which is a good thing. So you realize you don't have to do 50 bazillion different things to get a good outcome. So I would also say that any supplementation off the top of my head, it's going to be things like berberine or dihydroberberine. I'm a big fan of berberine. I've used that for a number of years now. It's a Chinese herb that's been shown to be almost as effective at controlling blood sugar levels as metformin, but it also has lipid optimizing effects, and it has some anti-cancer properties too. So I use it again for the ROI. Now, I would say you can get other things that can help with cholesterol, like red yeast rice extract, beta glucans. There's a brand that has a mixture called Revive MD Lipid. So Revive MD Lipid, no affiliation with them. If you guys want any of the particular supplements, just message me and I will get my team to message you back any links from Amazon that I have. Again, I will tell you, supplements are just that though. They're supplementary to a good foundational process. I've seen people do supplements and it won't work that well if they don't have the basic stuff locked in well. So just think of this as a supplementary tool. Now, I would also tell you that making sure that you're not pounding back tons and tons of saturated fat, like your typical keto diet will drive up ApoB. Meaning, like if you're doing bacon and sausage and a ton of eggs, remember, in the right context, with someone that doesn't have issues with ApoB, those things can be used. if you have high ApoB, you more than likely have some degree of hypolipidemia, which means you are better off swapping all those saturated fats with mono, unsaturated. So swap out the ghee, swap out the butter, swap it for macadamia nut oil, avocado oil, or Blueprint extra virgin olive oil. Like you got to replace those things, because even though they're all fats, they exert themselves differently in the body. The other thing that I would say is fundamentally you have to remember that as much as humanly possible, you need to eat foods with one ingredient. So sweet potato is just sweet potato. Blueberries are just blueberries. Brown rice is just brown rice. If most of your diet can be foods with one ingredient, you're already winning, because that immediately cleans up a lot of the inflammatory garbage that people eat that will be affecting this. See, it's not just fats that will affect this. And obviously processed fats too, so processed junk food, but also processed refined carbohydrates, and especially the combination of processed refined carbohydrates with a lot of saturated fat will drive ApoB through the roof. I've even seen people do a carnivore diet, and they felt good, their digestion felt good, but their lipids were way off the chart. Now, you'll have some people try to debunk this and go, oh no, it's not. It doesn't matter what cholesterol is. All that matters is the ratio. LDL doesn't matter. All that matters is the ratio. The ratio is important. That's why I mentioned to focus on getting your HDL optimized, because it is important. But the science is heavily in the favor of ApoB being a predictive marker of heart attack and stroke risk. And so I've literally seen people go from a carnivore-based approach, like more of a Mediterranean style, or even a little bit more plant-based, and the ApoB came down dramatically. And so I know that there are a lot of levers that you can pull to help yourself with this. You don't have to just pound a statin or a PCSK9 inhibitor. You don't have to go to medications right away. In fact, I would tell you that the goal is not to. The goal is not to. Now, other things that can be useful is certain bioregulated peptides. I would say certain peptides like TB500, even BPC157. I would also say stuff like thymosin alpha-1, but bioregulated peptides like Visugen and Velon, some of these have sort of target the endothelial lining, which is that thin lining in your arteries and veins. The stuff I told you about where the sandpaper would be rubbing the heck out of it. So again, peptides is a whole other topic in and of itself. I think episode 4 of my podcast covers more detailed peptide breakdown. And I talk about peptides and protocols and that type of thing in the Business Athlete Council as well, by the way. So that's where we talk about these high-level tactics and really flesh out processes. And then obviously for certain people, they just need that high-level one-on-one attention. And that's where I help you build out everything in a simple, sort of beautifully poetic way where it's not a headache for you to have to figure this stuff out. So in terms of foods, like I said, foods with one ingredient, whole foods, macro bowl concept, lots of good quality root vegetables, sweet potato, purple potato, spaghetti squash, butternut squash, making sure that you're focusing on eat the rainbow, lots of different colors, lots of different like insoluble fiber. Insoluble fiber is for pulling down ApoB because fiber binds to these cholesterol molecules and helps pull them out of your system. So, like I said, adapt the monounsaturated fats from saturated, focus on more of a Mediterranean base, focus on some of those foods that I mentioned with the fats, foods with one ingredient, stacking them together in like a macro bowl formation. That's going to, and then obviously if you wanted to stack on some berberine and some beta-glucans, even vitamin E, for example, can help with cholesterol. But I would say just my go-to is going to be your berberine or dihydroberberine, which is it's just more concentrated form. So ApoB, we want to get that down to like 70 or less. So check that, know your numbers. If you're like 100 plus, not good. We need to get that figured out because that's going to be the stuff that you really don't want to hear from the doctor when you're like 45, 50, and they're like, look, you need to go in for like freaking heart surgery or something. You need to get a stent put in because you've been doing these inflammatory things. And I will tell you guys, some of you guys know this. Some of you guys know that you've been unhealthy. You know that you are unhealthy. And it's like a male trait to stick our head in the sand like a damn ostrich and just kind of hope that we never have to hear the news. I don't want you to be a statistic. So look at your spouse today and look at your children and look at your team and realize that you have a duty to them to be the healthiest, strongest, most resilient version of yourself and nothing less. So I want you to remember that. Now, the next part of the puzzle, the next thing, fasting insulin. So most people, when they get blood work done, most labs will just look at fasting glucose, and they'll sometimes get hemoglobin A1C, so HbA1c. And they don't even get that all the time, which is strange to me. But the thing is so fasting glucose tells you how much sugar is in your bloodstream right now. Hemoglobin A1c tells you how much sugar is in your bloodstream over a 3-month average. So it sort of looks at the peaks and troughs over a 3-month period, and it figures out an average. So it can kind of tell you, hey, you've been running really high all the time over this 3-month period, or you've been down in a good range. It helps you pinpoint things on a more macro time frame. However, the one area that is missing for a lot of people that they don't run is fasting insulin. So I would say that elevated insulin is one of the earliest signs of metabolic dysfunction. Most people have what is called metabolic syndrome. So metabolic syndrome is basically where you have high triglycerides, high cholesterol, and high blood sugar levels. Now, you don't have to just be fat to warrant this. Obviously, people that are overweight typically will have these things as an issue. I've also found that you do get some people that are more like a skinny version of a metabolic syndrome sufferer. And what often you'll see is they have more belly fat. They have sort of a more visceral fat. So they have more fat through the midsection. They typically have low levels of muscle mass, so they're not super muscular. And they will often have... They often just feel exhausted and tired and are quite sensitive with their digestion and a lot of these other things. Now, metabolic syndrome will age you much faster, and it's basically sort of a collective. It's like a culmination of all these ailments kind of combining together like the perfect storm. And if you let metabolic syndrome proliferate and you become more and more insulin resistant, it can affect your blood flow to your vascular system. So very often what you'll find is people that become type 2 diabetic, if it's not managed, they even need to get like appendages amputated, toes, fingers, literally amputated, because they lose all this blood flow to the extremities. The same thing is true if they start getting problems with their eyesight, because think about all those little delicate vascular systems in your eyes. And so people that have this stuff, they start losing their vision earlier. It might not be important to you in your 30s or 40s, but believe me, I've worked with people in their 60s and 70s, and it is very important at that point because it basically is what gives them their autonomy. You can't drive anymore if you can't see. Just think about how impaired your life would be if you lost your vision in your 70s. So it's so important. And the other thing that people don't realize is now they think that Alzheimer's and early onset dementia is type 3 diabetes. Because think about it, again, you have a ton of blood flow through your brain, all those little delicate vessels and capillaries. Just like the eyesight, just like the amputation of fingers and toes, when you lose blood flow to your brain, destruction of cells, that's what causes early onset dementia and Alzheimer's. So I would say that fasting insulin is like a good way to know what's going on with all of this stuff, because basically what it means is it's an indication of how hard your pancreas is having to work to release insulin to control your blood sugar levels. Because think about this. Your pancreas is an organ in your body. Your pancreas produces insulin. When you eat food, your body takes that food and dissolves it down, and it starts to turn into sugar in your bloodstream. Your body needs to do something with that sugar. It cannot just let the sugar sit in your bloodstream. If it sits there, you could literally die if it went too high or too low. Now, most people, that's obviously not the case. But what you'll find is that if you are insulin resistant and you do get high blood sugar or low, you often feel like you get brain fog. A lot of people who have ADHD typically have insulin resistance, and it's not actually ADHD. They think it is. And so now they're taking Ritalin or Adderall, a stimulant, for a blood glucose problem, which it's not going to actually fix the problem. They need to fix their insulin sensitivity, it's a huge, and this is a very common problem. Another thing that I would see is that people need to take like a nap once they eat. So mid-afternoon, we need to take a nap. Part of that is, again, issues with insulin and blood glucose management. So I would say that in terms of understanding, and by the way, high insulin also contributes to cardiovascular disease. It not only statistically decreases your lifespan by 10 years, statistically, but it will proliferate cardiovascular disease. It typically makes fat loss more difficult. So for anyone who wants to be a great walking billboard, you want to get in great shape because it's going to be, and you want to become insulin sensitive because it makes fat loss easier. You want to build muscle. I would say one of the most potent ways to fix this fasting insulin issue is you've got to build muscle mass. Muscle mass is like a metabolic engine. It's like a storage tank for sugar. And so the more storage tanks you have, the less your body has to like keep releasing insulin to deal with the blood sugar levels. So consistent weight training. I mean, even episode 30 that I just released, that was all on training optimally. So go take a listen to that where I talk about the ROI of different exercises. But that's also why I train legs 2 times a week. And I train back 2 times a week because those big muscle groups have a bigger metabolic ROI. But I would say in general, building muscle mass, getting your step count up, 12 to 15,000 steps a day, splitting that step count up all through the day. Pepper it out through the day. Do not be the guy or gal that gets up in the morning, goes and does their workout, and then does 60 minutes of cardio, and then sits on their butt all day long. That is not going to help you with your insulin sensitivity at all. You've got to strategically weave it into your routine. One of the things that I really drive home with my Business Athlete Council members is how to incorporate these concepts into a useful workflow. I've talked about it in many of the podcasts. So I've really built out good systems to leverage this. Literally, as we speak right now, I'm walking on my walking pad with my standing desk while I do this podcast for you. So I'm getting about 60 minutes of walking and just doing this. That's a huge optimization tool for improving fasting insulin. And again, fasting insulin is a big, wide range. The range is about 5 through to 20 or 5 through to 25. Now, if you're up at like 15 or 20, that to me is terrible. That's not good, but it's normal. So the challenge you face is you go to the doctor, they look at these things and they're all normal, they're green. And they say, oh, you're good, you can go home. And because they don't really explain anything to you and you don't know this information, you don't understand why you're getting brain fog. You don't understand why you're feeling exhausted. You don't understand all these things because you're not even close to being in the Goldilocks zone. So I want people to be like down below 5. My fasting insulin's like 2 or 3. It's so low, it's like a warning. But that's because it's almost too good. It's not even that it's too good. It's just so efficient that the average person's not close to that. And I see a lot of my people get to that zone or very close. And what it means is that your body's just very, very surgical with how it operates. It's very efficient. Another way that you can improve this is periods of intermittent fasting. If you're eating constantly, if you're eating, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then snacks between each meal all day, you will have a degree of more higher insulin because your body's having to release more to control those constant bursts of food. So it's different for everyone though. For some people, if their digestion's sensitive and not great, they may have to eat more frequently. I've got people like that. And then for some people, they can get away with eating 1 or 2 big meals a day, and that works for them. And so you've got to practice and figure out what works for you. But again, a lot of the principles that I talked about with the diet in terms of monounsaturated fats, Mediterranean sort of plant-based themes, eat the rainbow, foods with one ingredient, those types of principles are, in my opinion, the best way to optimize all of this stuff. Now, what I would say as a bonus is time your carbohydrate use for post-workout and on days you weight train. So on active rest days, maybe you do more of like a protein and monounsaturated fat-based meal with your rainbow vegetables. And then on a day where you train and lift weights, you do some berries, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, some red grapefruit after you train to get that glycogen replacement, which is a good thing for performance. But your body's ready to soak those carbohydrates up because you just trained. And then even at the end, on the same day, at the end, that's where you might insert your root vegetables or your grains. So maybe some sweet potato, some purple potato, butternut squash, or basmati rice, jasmine rice, that type of stuff. So the timing can be useful. There is a time and place for certain things, and the more optimized you want to get, the more you want to play with that timing. Now, number 3, let me just grab a drink, is C-reactive protein, or HSCRP. So C-reactive protein is like a canary in the coal mine marker for how likely you are to have a heart attack or stroke. It's one that they don't run very often, and it's amazing that they don't, because it's a precursor, and it's a summary of the inflammation in your body. So if you have high levels of HSCRP, it typically means that your body is fighting inflammation on multiple fronts. And what you'll find is that chronic inflammation like this is often linked to heart disease, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, cancer, and neurodegeneration. And how many people do we know that have cancer or some type of cognitive decline? So many people. Like you don't realize, or maybe you do, that you can literally avoid all of this stuff and actually thrive. This is why I do what I do, because I'm like, you know what? People don't realize how much potency they have with their diet, with the supplementation, with their lifestyle to really improve these data sets. And when they improve them, their energy goes through the roof. Their output goes through the roof. They just become a better version of themselves. And to me, that's a massive win. I mean, building a business and being a high-level professional is challenging enough on a good day. You need to give yourself an unfair advantage. And the way you become a category of one is by optimizing these systems. So the reason why this matters is because it's often reflective of how much systemic inflammation you're dealing with. And what I find is this is very common in guys in their 40s and 50s. Typically what you'll find is it's guys that are running a slightly higher body fat level. They may have a little bit of muscle mass, but they definitely got the dad bod thing going on. And they just have generally a bit too much of a sloppy diet. They might have some macro bowl stuff going on, but they're just adding in ice cream at nighttime, and they're snacking on cookies in the day, and there's just random snack foods and junk that they don't realize is having a massive impact on their health. And what I would say is that when you're younger, like when you're in your 20s, you can kind of get away with some of that on the surface. But in your 30s and 40s, you do that and you will get a ton of inflammation. And just think about it from this perspective that inflammation will affect your recovery. So very often you'll notice that you start getting lots of little injuries, aches, and strains. You just don't recover well from your training. You find that you might feel kind of burned out more often because you just don't have a good recovery threshold. You might find that you get a lot of brain fog, or maybe you have some mental health issues. Remember this, inflammation in your body, in your cardiovascular system, in your arterial system, in your respiratory system might look like a cold or a flu or some type of like heart disease. That inflammation localized to your brain looks like anxiety, it looks like depression, it looks like ADHD. It looks like mental health diagnosis. So what I tell people is that not only is it in your vested interest to get HSCRP down from a longevity and a sort of anti-stroke and anti-heart attack prevention standpoint, but you will probably almost always see improvements in cognitive output and mental health. And that to me is a huge part of this. Your rate limiting factor to your next level is your mental health and psychology. If you're an erratic, irritable, hot mess that's up and down like a yo-yo, you will self-sabotage and self-destruct all the time. And you know that's true if you've been doing it, because you can just look at your result and you look at the patterns. So what I tell people is that's why this marker matters so much. Because if you can stabilize levels and you can maximize this, you will see massive changes in the quality of your life. Now, I would say in general, this biomarker is synonymous with business people, entrepreneurs, business people that just go. They don't sleep well. They take a bunch of caffeine and stimulants. They throw in some Ritalin or some Adderall. They maybe eat some healthy food, but they throw in some processed stuff too. They don't work out consistently. They sit on their butt too much. It's just your typical person. So what I would say is everything that I've mentioned in the above breakdowns, I would say get outside and walk every day in the sunlight. I would say you want to sweat in some capacity every day. So whether it's weight training or rucking or some yoga or something, you need to sweat and exert yourself every day. I would be telling you that foods that are high in polyphenols and foods that are high in antioxidant profiles. It's why I do blueberries and blackberries every day, high in antioxidants. It's why I do the Blueprint extra virgin olive oil, high in polyphenols. So you want to be stacking your diet with polyphenols and antioxidants, rainbow vegetables, whole foods with one ingredient, Mediterranean style or plant-based sort of base that you modify. That is, in my opinion, such a powerful set of structures. Now, other things that can help with this is sauna and potentially cold immersion. So I would say that with cold immersion, you've got to kind of test this and see. Because cold exposure is a form of stress. And so if you're not recovering well and you're getting injured and you're feeling burned out, sometimes the cold can exacerbate it. But what I would tell you is jump in there, test it for a week. And if you notice that your resting heart rate is coming down over time and you notice that your heart rate variability is increasing, it typically means that you're recovering from the stimulus. If you notice that your resting heart rate's increasing a bunch and you notice that your heart rate variability is tanking, that's usually a sign that you're not recovering from it very well. So it is case dependent. But I would say in general, walking outside in the sun and sauna, 20 minutes, 5 times a week as a base, very, very good for heart health, very good for inflammatory systems in the body. Now, other supplements that can be useful with this is things like glutathione or NAC. So NAC is the precursor to glutathione. So I use NAC. Also NAD. Now, this also comes back to the idea of some of the peptides that I mentioned. So things like thymosin alpha-1, thymogen, Vesugin, Velon. Those are bioregulator peptides. But then even things like a CLO blend, which is KPV, BPC157, TB500, and GHKCU. So especially TB500, I've seen have pretty positive effects with this. And as a side note, even things like retatrutide, which is a GLP-3, have been shown in some of the blood work I've seen even recently to improve metabolic syndrome markers. So blood glucose levels, lipid profiles, blood pressure, all of that stuff ties in. Blood pressure is also something to know with this because that will be having an effect on your HSCRP. So what I would say in general is if you did even some of those things that I mentioned and stacked in a lot of the processes from the previous suggestions and you focus on optimizing your sleep. And remember, I'll caveat this and say with every pillar, you must focus on your psychology and your mood. If you're super stressed, OCD, neurotic, that's going to have a detrimental effect on these markers. It just will. So you've got to learn how to control your state, to control your nervous system. I've done entire episodes on nervous system management and burnout. Go listen to those ones. I mean, it's just fundamentally important that you grasp these things. And I'm telling you, this is how, when your body handles more inflammation, you can handle more output. You can push harder without burning out. You age slower. You get in better shape. You feel more energized. I mean, it's such a high tide that rises all ships. Now, Beyond that, testosterone, total and free. And I would say even for the ladies, this is important. Because especially for the women, once you start to go into menopause, you really need to be paying attention to your sex hormones. You need to pay attention to your estrogen as well. Even for the guys, it's something that we want to pay attention to because estrogen is cardiovascular protective and it helps with mood stabilization and brain health. But I would say in general, focusing on total and free testosterone. Like I mentioned to you, the testosterone range is massive. And so you might go to the doctor and he says, oh, well, you're at 320, which to me is garbage. So you're normal, but that's so far from optimal. Most people don't realize that testosterone will it doesn't just affect muscle mass. They think it's just about bodybuilding. That's the least of it. It has a massive effect on your mood, even on your drive and your grit. So what they've found is that when your testosterone levels are more optimal, you have more drive. You know that like motivation you feel each day to get hard stuff done and like lean into challenging things and be a leader? That feeling. And so from that reason alone, for the guys out there, it's such an important lever to focus on. So important. And it will have a big effect on your mood, on your libido, on your sleep, on how much muscle mass you can build and retain. A lot of people who have this as low, they just don't have a great physique. They don't even look like they're in shape, really. And they because you don't have as much muscle mass as you could or should, that's when you start seeing the metabolic syndrome issues. But what I will say is that most people just obsess and fret over total testosterone. They don't think about free testosterone, free. Now, the reason why free is important is because that's the stuff that's bioavailable. That's the stuff that's bioavailable. Now, I'm just going to add in an extra marker here as a side note. But the reason why you want to know free is because that's the stuff that actually matters. You can have a high total testosterone and a low free. And for that reason, it's all bound up and it's not useful. The thing that binds up the total testosterone is your sex hormone binding globulin, SHBG. So if you have low free, I would highly advise at some point you run SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin, to see where you are at. Because that's going to be the thing that binds up the total. And like I mentioned, part of what I do in my coaching is I can help people figure out, okay, if that's the case, if that's your issue, what do you need to be doing with your lifestyle, with your diet, with your supplementation to fix that? Because remember, you can go to ChatGPT and go, tell me what foods to add in to help with free testosterone. But is it going to factor in all your food sensitivities? Does it understand your digestive system and like what you're sensitive to and what you're having reactions to? Have you done a hair mineral analysis where you're looking at different minerals in your system that are suboptimal or optimal, and have you cross-referenced it with those too? This is the ROI of what we do. This is why I'm able to get in the shape that I'm in at 41 years old at the time of this recording and maintain my condition physically and stay strong and still produce at a high level every day and never get sick. And you guys see this in real time. Anyone who follows me on Facebook, you will see this in real time over an extended period of time. And the reason why I share in my stories all the time is it's proof. It's the proof of life. It's demonstrating to you that it is possible. So I would say in terms of testosterone, weight training, fundamentally important. You got to weight train. Alcohol elimination, get it out of your routine. Focus on sleep. Sleep optimization is key. Get sunlight a couple of times every day and get your step count done outside in some capacity. All of that stuff, all those lifestyle levers help. Now, if you want to do things the all-natural way, focus on the quality of your diet, foods with one ingredient, right? Don't be slamming back bunches of processed garbage. Focus on foods that are high in magnesium, zinc, boron, vitamin D, and selenium. Stack in foods that are high in those things. Supplements like Tongkat Ali or Fedosia agrestis, Shilajit, pine pollen can all help optimize total and free testosterone. Now, the secondary approach to this is if you want to use a medication called enclomiphene citrate. So enclomiphene citrate basically works on the pituitary, and it helps stimulate your LH and FSH hormones, which are like your fertility hormones. Very often, if someone wants to be more fertile, they might take some enclomiphene citrate to help with those fertility hormones. Because when the LH and FSH, so luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, are elevated, you're more fertile, but also that turns into testosterone. So a lot of people, and I've got many students that will use a little bit of enclomiphene citrate instead of doing just a bunch of the herbal compounds. And that can push you up multiple hundreds of points. And then the last component is, if you've done your due diligence and you are informed and you want the help, a well-planned TRT, HRT protocol where you're dialing in the dosing and the shot frequency to get in that Goldilocks zone and to stay there as much as you can. I would say that for a lot of people, if you don't, plan on having any more children, it could be worth doing a good TRT protocol. And even if you do plan on having children, I've helped many men conceive their children while on TRT. I've done it multiple times. I've seen it in action. But I would say those are going to be your pathways to optimization. But you want to be up around 8 to 900. 8 to 900 instead of 300. That's where you're going to get the most vitality, the most drive, the best body composition change, you name it. But you want to make sure you don't go too high either. Too high will cause downstream physiological effects that are not desirable. You'll often see increases in blood pressure, hemoglobin, and hematocrit, which makes your blood thicker. That's where all the heart attack and heart stuff with TRT comes from. It doesn't come from the TRT itself. It doesn't come from a responsible protocol. It comes from when people are taking too much, aka most bodybuilders. That's why. It's not in and of itself a bad thing. Now, the next thing is thyroid hormones. So thyroid hormones are like the metabolism, the thermostat of your body. Basically, all the systems in your body get regulated on this thermostat. So it will affect your rates of digestion. It will affect the rate that you breathe. It will affect your heart rate. It affects how hot or cold your body feels. It affects hair loss. It affects your skin quality, like how good your skin is. It affects a lot of things. It affects your metabolism. So your basal metabolic rate, how many calories you burn. A lot of people, when they diet down and diet and they don't look after themselves well, they will get metabolic downregulation, and part of it is thyroid issues. It's very common to get a thyroid autoimmune disease, like Hashimoto's. So you've got to remember that thyroid is another key part of the puzzle. So I would be saying TSH, free T3, and free T4. So thyroid hormones as a package. Now, I would also probably add in some thyroid antibody testing just to make sure you're not having some type of autoimmune reaction. Because if you are, that's where you need to clean up your environment first. So chlorine, fluoride, chemicals in your environment. You need to sort of overhaul the quality of everything that's coming in contact with your skin, your cosmetics, your laundry soaps, your dish soaps, all that stuff. That's a process. But that's worth playing with when it comes to thyroid optimization. But what I would say is that if you're feeling tired, if you're gaining weight suddenly, if you're getting brain fog and your motivation is low, very often it's low thyroid. So one of the ways that you can optimize this is iodine-rich food. So iodine helps with thyroid metabolism. Iodine and selenium. So things like Brazil nuts with selenium. Sea vegetables, so seaweed crackers, nori sheets, sushi rolls. Certain types of seafood, those things high in iodine help with optimizing TSH, so thyroid stimulating hormone, which then turn into and convert into T3 and T4. Your primary system is T3. So I'd be saying adding in sea vegetables, adding in selenium. You could also supplement with a little bit of like Lugol's iodine if you want. But again, you've got to be mindful about how you do this. I would say iodine supplementation with thyroid is something you need to be a bit more careful with, because you can easily take too much and then you will feel it. Your heart rate will get higher and you just won't feel good. You'll get jittery. So it's absolutely worth getting some guidance with that. I use thiodine supplementation myself because I don't particularly eat a lot of the sea vegetables. I do a little bit, but I really wanted to be able to fine-tune my thyroid really, really accurately. And so I do a little bit of that. That's just my choice. But I've dialed that in. I understand this system very well. So TSH, especially if you feel like your hair's thinning out, if you're feeling tired, if you're getting brain fog, and your testosterone comes back as normal, if your sex hormones come back as normal, or even if they don't, thyroid is where you want to be focusing. Now, another one that I wanted to throw in here that might throw people off, they probably didn't think about this one, because it seems to be common, but it's one that I think people overlook at the same time, is your ferritin. So ferritin measures stored iron in your body. And why it matters is that iron is essential for oxygen transportation and cellular energy production. Low ferritin can cause fatigue, poor like exercise performance, like you just don't feel like you can train very hard, and brain fog. And so iron deficiency is pretty common, especially in women. And so we want to know what your iron is, but obviously we want to know what your ferritin is, because that's just stored iron. It's like your fuel tanks of iron. Because think about this. One of the main drivers to low energy, low vitality is low iron. Now, what I would say in and of itself with iron is that it's going to be one of those things where it's kind of multifactorial. You could go to AI and you could plug in, give me the top 10 foods high in iron, and just start incorporating those into your macro bowls and into your rotation, things that you like the look of, right? That's the first thing. What I would also be focusing on is the synergists, the cofactors. So vitamin C is one. So you add in some lemon water every day. Have your iron-rich foods, your dark leafy greens. That's why I do the kale microgreens and the broccoli microgreens. Dark leafy greens are really good for this. Some people will use different types of organ meats, but iron or even molasses. Use a little bit of molasses post-workout. You get a little bit of sugar for the glycogen replacement, and you're getting the iron intake from that. I will often do that with my wife and daughter. So we want the vitamin C optimization in the form of lemon, citrus, but we also want copper. And that's why also what I'll often do is I'll add 1 or 2 tablespoons of cooked canned lentils to my main meals, because it's got that little bit of copper in it, and copper helps with iron absorption, which is going to obviously complement ferritin. So I would tell you that, and especially what you'll find is that women that are still having their menstrual cycle, they will be more susceptible to low levels of iron. It's not as common in women that have gone through menopause, because you're not losing a bunch of iron and magnesium in your blood with your menstrual cycle. That's what causes it. And so what I tell people, especially for the ladies that are still have menstrual cycles, I'll say, you need to be making sure that through the month you add in foods that are high in iron and magnesium. Like cacao nibs are high in magnesium. That's why women crave chocolate at certain points in the month. You're not craving the chocolate, you're craving the magnesium that's in the cacao nibs. Your body's an amazing thing. We just don't understand the language very well. But when you can understand what the signals are that it's trying to tell you, Lord have mercy, you can fine-tune like an absolute savage, like a total operator. So I would say in terms of like performance, oxygen delivery to the brain, lower endurance with your training if you gas out really quick, if you just feel tired, let's focus on your ferritin, let's focus on your iron, do some of the things that I mentioned above here, know that number, get that data. Another one is vitamin D. So vitamin D is actually a hormone precursor. And obviously you get it from sunlight. You can actually get it if you put mushrooms out in the sun and you just let them kind of soak in the sun. But I typically tell people sunlight, and then obviously if you want to supplement with a little bit of vitamin D3 plus K2. I've often had issues with vitamin D, even though I get a lot of sun. There's a genetic component to this. So I take 10,000 IUs of vitamin D3 plus K2, and it puts me right in that Goldilocks zone. So I wouldn't necessarily say that's a good dose for you, though. This is where everyone is different. I've seen people do that dose, and that's not ideal. So do not just cookie cutter stuff. But what I will say is that, again, like other metrics, vitamin D has got a wide range. It's like 30 through to 100. You do need to be mindful with vitamin D because it's a fat-soluble vitamin, so it can build up a little bit of a toxicity in your system if you're at 100 plus for an extended period of time. So I would tell you to get around 80 as a sweet spot. That's why I tell people to get outside 2+ times a day, especially in spring and summer, to wear a tank top or take your shirt off, take your sunglasses off, get all those photoreceptors in your eyes, help with this vitamin D uptake. It's why people get more sick in winter. Not because colds and flus are seasonal, but because their vitamin D drops. Most people don't realize that vitamin D affects immune system, but it also affects your mental health. Most of the depression and mental health issues and getting colds and flus all the time comes from low levels of vitamin D. So I would say not only do you want to get up around 80, even if someone might be 35 or 40, that's considered normal, but that's garbage. You're not going to be optimal there. So if you're getting sick more often than you would like, and you feel like your mood is not great, and you also maybe feel like your testosterone is kind of low, this is a area of focus that I would say take very seriously, especially because of how it affects your mood and your immune system. See, most people don't think about their immune system. The last thing I want to do as a husband, father, and operator is get sick. That just throws your whole game off. You can't produce like you normally would. You can't get stuff done like you normally would. So as an entrepreneur, as a leader, you have a vested interest in keeping yourself really healthy so you're not having to call in sick days. Don't be the entrepreneur. Don't be the employee or employer that's like constantly calling in sick days and stuff. And even if you don't call in, you're still not going to perform well if you're feeling sick. So lock in that vitamin D level. Sunlight plus some supplementation. Make sure that you get the D3 plus K2, because K2 is a cofactor in absorption. Otherwise, if you're just slamming back a bunch of vitamin D3, you ain't going to absorb all of it if you're not getting the K2. So make sure you lock in some K2. Triglycerides. So we've got a couple more. Triglycerides. So triglycerides are one of those markers that I mentioned that are a sign of metabolic health. If you have high triglycerides, it's often reflective of insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. All the stuff that I talked about with insulin ties back into this. And what people don't realize is that high triglycerides over an extended period of time will increase your risk for heart disease and for fatty liver disease. So high triglycerides are strongly associated with excess sugar and refined carbohydrate intake, even though it's basically fats in your bloodstream. This is where I would say the two things that drive it are a lot of processed fats, trans fats, or a too much saturated fat like ghee, butter, bacon, sausage, and not enough good quality monounsaturated fats. Remember, like I said, not all fats are created equal, and it doesn't mean that they're not okay for everyone. But someone who's got sensitive markers to this, that's why people get confused with diet. Because you might have a guy that doesn't have any issues with these, and he's slamming back tons of bacon, and he thinks that's normal for everyone. But then you give it to Joe down the road, and his triglycerides and his ApoB go through the roof. So the way to play this more safely is monounsaturated omega-3 fats, like I mentioned, all the stuff that I mentioned in the beginning. But also, you've got to make sure that you're consuming less refined processed carbohydrates. So whole food carbohydrates, root vegetables, whole grains. Don't get white refined stuff. Basically, anything that's in a box with a package is going to have some degree of refinement in this realm. A lot of snack foods will. So your goal is to find healthier snack alternatives so you can still have things you enjoy, but it's not causing this detrimental downstream effect. Because if you start getting metabolic syndrome from the high triglycerides, you're going to get tons of belly fat. You're going to have a big old pot belly. That in and of itself looks like garbage. You don't look good when you look like that. But beyond that, brain fog, you're going to age faster. Just think about the brain fog that people struggle through. You might not even realize how much you even have. And if you can fix that, it might massively improve your productivity and output. That's what excites me. Obviously, the abs and looking in shape's one thing. But how you can perform, man, that's the fun part. That's the part that really is worth pursuing. And I say this from firsthand experience. So basically, all the things that would help with improving insulin are going to be the same things with triglycerides. Like I just mentioned, though, excess sugars and refined carbohydrate intake. So whole fruits, carbohydrates with foods with one ingredient. Brown rice is just brown rice. Jasmine rice is just jasmine rice. Butternut squash is just butternut squash. Quinoa is just quinoa. You get the point. Now, homocysteine. So homocysteine is a methylation and cardiovascular risk marker. This is one that's worth getting done because obviously anything that really ties into cardiovascular risk is very important because it's sort of one of those things that happens under the surface for a long period of time and then all at once. And you do not want to be that person that ignores it and then has a heart attack or stroke and you're done, right? Like be proactive here. And the thing with homocysteine is that it basically, when it's elevated, it damages blood vessels and increases heart disease risk. High levels are often deficiencies with B vitamins and the methylation of those B vitamins. So not only do you maybe have low B vitamins in your system, but the way your body does what's called methylation. And this is quite common actually. Now, a couple of ways to work on this is make sure that the B vitamins that you use as a supplement are methylated. I would say a supplement that I'm a big fan of that I think is very versatile is TMG, trimethylglycine. So I use trimethylglycine daily. I get my students to use it if they have any inclination that they want to improve their cardiovascular risk outcomes. So I think it's a good, really useful supplement. It's cheap. It's got a great use case. So I would say in general, B vitamins, foods that are rich in B vitamins, trimethylglycine, TMG, making sure that all the previous food suggestions that I've provided are tied in. I keep saying that because I want you guys to realize that a lot of those principles will universally improve all metrics. That's the best part. So like when I say focus on, Mediterranean-based, plant-based, lots of colors, monounsaturated fats, lean proteins, whole foods with one ingredient, good quality root vegetables, ancient grains, fermented foods, adaptogens like lion's mane and shiitake mushrooms. Man, what a list of secret weapons. That's how you get optimized. So, homocysteine, like I mentioned, that's going to help decrease cardiovascular risk. When you improve methylation of B vitamins, you'll notice that your energy improves a lot because vitamin B12 is associated with energy levels and nerve function. So if you're dealing with methylation issues, you're not going to be getting the benefit of that. So typically if your energy is really low and or your B vitamins are low, I would say B vitamin supplementation, B vitamins in whole foods, but make sure that you use a methylated B vitamin and make sure that you're using something like trimethylglycine as well. Now, the last thing, DHEA. So DHEA is what I would call a stress buffering neurosteroid. What a mouthful, right? Basically, it not only works upstream from testosterone and helps increase testosterone values. So if you're someone that has low testosterone, low sex hormones, often it's DHEA depletion as well. So it's like I said, vitamin D affects testosterone, but also DHEA does too. And what you'll find that depletes DHEA is stress. Now, like I mentioned, it serves as a precursor to testosterone and estrogen. But DHEA supports energy, immune function, and stress resilience. Stress resilience. One of the things I found was that when I used strategic DHEA supplementation and got into the Goldilocks zone, I swear to you, my ability to handle stress improved. It's quite a nuanced thing to explain. I used to hit burnout points often. So I would push and push and push, and then I'd burn out, and I'd either get sick, or I would just feel like I was having a bit of a mental breakdown. And I would sort of stop, start, like 75 hard 10 times. What I found was that when I optimized DHEA, and there's another hormone that works in tandem with this, pregnenolone, but again, I'll talk about that in the Business Athlete Council, so if you want to get in there, get in there. But DHEA seemed to help improve the way you buffer stress. So now I feel like I can handle a lot more pressure. I can handle pushing harder for longer without burning out. I would actually say that's one of the best experiences I've felt from a biofeedback standpoint. The ability to just like have less constrained capacity. Your rate limiting factor often is going to be your ability to not burn out, because when you burn out, you're either going to have a mental breakdown or you're just going to yo-yo diet and relapse because you cannot manage your state. You cannot manage your nervous system well. and all the inflammation is going to go through the roof, and you're just going to feel like garbage. So DHEA, I would say, using large language models, Grok, ChatGPT, give me the top 10 healthiest foods that help with DHEA production. There's a bunch of them. For example, sweet potatoes one. Now, I found for me personally, I wanted to supplement with a little bit to kind of get the positive effect enough. But I would tell you that managing your stress, so focusing on your sleep, getting things in that can help with cortisol production, Tulsi tea, theanine, serene, theanine in general, magnesium, Tulsi, relora, some of these herbs that kind of help calm your system down, chamomile, spring dragon longevity tea. These are herbs that can help calm down your nervous system and bring that cortisol down to like a baseline. Because too much cortisol will chew through your DHEA reservoir. And then when that happens, that's when you hit that burnout fast, that's when your testosterone tanks, and that's when you lose a lot of your drive and grit. Can you see how all of these are kind of connected? And if you're feeling like your drive is low and your grit's low and you're just kind of flaky and all over the place, can you see how when you optimize the chemical systems in your body, you can change your life? And then think about how easy it is to stay in shape when you are in that place. It just gets easy at that point. So I share all this with you because I'm telling you that those 10 markers are going to have a direct long-term impact on your revenue, on your growth personally, on your performance metrics in your business, but also your personal life metrics, the way that you interact with your spouse, the bandwidth you have for your children, the standard you set for all of them. Like, I absolutely would tell you that it's in your best interest as a business investment to get these 10 tested and to get them optimized and to stay on top of them. Like I say in every episode, you are the high tide that rises all ships. And you do set a standard for your children and your team. And most of all, do it for you. Do it because you want to actualize all the potential in you. Because you can and you will. So go out there today. Know your numbers. Like any good business, know your numbers, know your data. And then take that data and do something useful with it. Implement these systems. In a world full of average people that sit in the gray zone and just perform so suboptimally and never really achieve significant in their life at all, they don't achieve anything that fulfills them. Be an outsider. Be a category of one. And that is what it means to be a business athlete.